Just north of the Sydney suburban sprawl lies Marramarra National Park, a silent expanse of sandstone ridges and tidal waters. The crowds don't tend to come here. Instead, the landscape is left to itself, protecting a quiet, unyielding stretch of native bush, seasonal blooms, and historic ruins slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Our journey today is along the Marramarra Ridge Trail, a fire trail that traces its way down to the Marramarra Creek, with a few steep sections that should provide some sweeping views of the valley. Situated at the bottom of the ridge, near the tidal waters, is the Orchard Campground, which gets its name from the historic orange orchards planted by early settlers that still stand nearby. This is a pretty straightforward remote walk-in site, making it an ideal choice for backpackers seeking solitude. There should be some basic facilities at the campsite, but crucially no water, since the nearby creek is a tidal saltwater environment. So we're carrying everything we need. Because the ridge trail is highly exposed with very little shade, the goal is to cover as much ground as possible during the cool morning hours. Let's get moving. David Lynch is cinema's great architect of the unexplained. For decades, his work has been described as surreal, weird, and an escape from logic. Lynch, during his life, famously refused to explain his films, treating them not as puzzles to be solved, but as open mysteries to be experienced. He charted the wilderness of the unconscious, mapping images and ideas through pure intuition. But while Lynch builds these haunting dreamscapes out of raw instinct, Todd McGowan dissects them through a philosophical lens to reveal the hidden psychological terrain at play beneath the surface. In his book, The Impossible David Lynch, McGowan makes an argument that completely flips our understanding of Lynch on its head. He claims that David Lynch's films aren't actually interested in escaping from reality into the bizarre. Instead, they are obsessed with normality. McGowan's central thesis is that the normal life we build for ourselves, our routines, social groups, and so on, is the ultimate fiction. It is a carefully maintained fantasy designed to protect us from something psychoanalysis calls the real. The raw, chaotic, and completely indifferent undercurrents of existence. When we go camping, we think we are experiencing nature, but really, we are testing the limits of our psychological safety. We erect a fragile, millimeter-thin wall of fabric and call it a shelter. We sit by a fire, staring into the dark, clinging to the illusion of control. But in a Lynchian universe, we can never run far enough to escape the structures of our own mind. The deeper we walk into the isolation of the woods, the closer we get to the edge of that fantasy. And when the fire finally burns down to cold ash, that is when the real bleeds through. So we've just finished descending down to the Marramarra Creek. I've got to say, it's really beautiful down here. It's lush, lots of bird noises around. I think it's going to be a beautiful place to camp. We're still about 1 kilometre away from Orchard Camp down that way, but I thought we'd go and check out the main campsite, which is down this other track, another kilometre away, following the Marramarra Creek along. It's still really early, we've got plenty of time, so yeah, let's explore a little bit. This is Orchard Campground. There are some orange trees. This seems to be the best spot here, and there's already some firewood, so I'll probably take this. It doesn't look like there's anyone else around today. So someone who I assume was camping here left the fire smouldering, and only threw a few logs on and it flared back to life. So it just goes to show you really got to make sure fires are put out. When we look at our organized campsites, what we're actually looking at is a beautifully staged performance of safety. Think about the physical ritual of it. We arrive at a spot in the middle of nowhere. It's wild, unstructured, and completely indifferent to us. But within 20 minutes, we've laid out a ground sheet, snapped poles together, staked out lines, tensioning them until the fabric is taut and perfect. We unpack a tiny stove, place a water bottle, and suddenly we've built a home. In the language of daily life, we might call this getting back to basics, self-reliance. But if we look at this through the lens of Todd McGowan's psychoanalytics, this isn't an escape from structure at all. It's the construction of a perfect, cohesive fantasy. Now, when we hear the word fantasy, we might think of dragons, spaceships, or wild, unrealistic daydreams. We think of fantasy as something that destabilizes reality. But McGowan, drawing on Lacanian psychoanalysis, shows us that fantasy does the exact opposite. Fantasy is the protective screen that holds our reality together. It is the psychological framework we build to make sense of a world that is fundamentally chaotic and traumatic. It gives us a narrative. It tells us who we are, what we want, and it promises us that if we just follow the right steps, we will be safe and happy. Look at how this maps onto the ultralight hiker, the solo camper. The fantasy we carry into the woods is the myth of the deliberate life. We tell ourselves, if I can just strip away the noise of the city, the social media notifications, the domestic complications, if I can just boil down existence to this one-man tent and a trail map, I will find a pure, unadulterated peace. We curate this experience meticulously. Every piece of gear has its place. Every weight is calculated down to the gram. The fantasy is beautifully organized, self-contained, and completely coherent. This is exactly how David Lynch begins his stories. It's the foundation of what McGowan calls Lynch's two-part split structure. Lynch doesn't start with the weirdness. He starts with a hyper-exaggerated version of the normal fantasy. Think of the opening of Blue Velvet. We get the bright red roses, the whitest picket fences, the yellow school bus moving in slow motion, and a friendly fireman waving to the camera. It's an immaculate, comforting dream of small-town America. Or think of Mulholland Drive. Betty arrives in Los Angeles with bright eyes, boundless optimism, and a perfect sunny narrative of making it big as an actress. McGowan argues that Lynch sets up these worlds not to mock them, but because he understands that human beings need these fictions to survive. We live inside them. This campsite with clean lines, orderly sleep system, and organized gear is the white picket fence. It is a tiny pocket of civilized sanity carved out of the wilderness. McGowan writes, "Everything we are allowed to approach by way of reality remains rooted in fantasy. As a category, fantasy should not be opposed to reality because it is fantasy that sustains what we experience as reality. Fantasy provides not just temporality, but it also constantly works to fill in the gaps that populate the fragmentary experience of desire. Without fantasy, our experience would lack a sense of coherence. In this way, fantasy offers subjects respite from the incoherence that plagues their experience." But here is the catch, and this is the pivot point that McGowan highlights in every Lynch film. A fantasy can only stay cohesive if it remains completely sealed. The moment a single foreign element infiltrates it, the entire structure begins to warp. When you're sitting out here alone, the fantasy feels solid while the sun is up. But as the light fades, the edges of that fantasy begin to fray. The bush doesn't feel peaceful anymore, it feels silent. The wind buffeting the tent walls doesn't sound like nature, it starts to sound like a presence. You start to realize that the only thing keeping the vast chaotic reality of the wild from collapsing in on you is a millimeter of synthetic fabric and the story you've told yourself. Lynch's genius is showing us that the nightmare isn't waiting for us out there in the dark. The nightmare is already contained within the normal fantasy itself, just waiting for a crack to appear. And all it takes is one ordinary, unavoidable truth to break the seal. McGowan writes, "Through the act of taking normality to its logical extreme, Lynch reveals how the bizarre is not opposed to the normal, but inherent within it." Sigmund Freud wrote about a glitch in the human psyche that he called the repetition compulsion, a deeply unsettling tendency to replay our own traumas over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. In the Impossible David Lynch, Todd McGowan applies this to the very structure of Lynch's cinema. The conscious mind wants to move forward, to escape, to leave the past behind. But the unconscious mind doesn't understand linear time. It moves in a circle. When an object from your hidden life appears in the wild, it isn't an external threat. It's an internal alarm clock. It's your unconscious signaling that the wall of your fantasy has just breached. Your conscious mind panics, and your instinct is to run, to find safety. But in your unconscious world, fleeing from your trauma only guarantees you'll head right. This is the trick of the Lynchian universe. The monster in the dark was never a stranger, it was you. David Lynch's cinema forces us to confront this exact impossible split. We are divided creatures, trapped between the fragile safe fantasy we stage in the light and the repressed truths that stalk us from the dark. It's amazing what sunrise does to a psychological landscape. The birds return, the shadows shrink, and the forest slips right back into its symbolic safety. Ultimately, we hike into a remote wilderness like this because we believe in the safety of a view. We want to be pure spectators, passing through an alien environment while maintaining a comfortable, voyeuristic separation. We look at the landscape as if it exists entirely in itself, completely unconcerned with us, allowing us to remain hidden, secure, and uninvolved. This is no different from the way we experience a film. We seek out the wild for the same reason we step into a theatre, to lose ourselves in a pristine fantasy while remaining safely out of frame. As Todd McGowan writes, spectators watch from a distance. They watch the screen images from a position that ensures their lack of direct involvement in what they see. The unidirectional viewing situation permits the spectator to remain safe within the anonymity of darkness. The distance between screen and spectator becomes a more significant problem insofar as it so often remains unperceived amid the illusory presence of screen images and events. But sometimes something happens out here that causes the safe distance to completely evaporate. A strange, uncanny event punctures the night, collapsing the space between the observer and the observed, between the fragile identity of the hiker and the quiet indifference of the forest. Like a shift in a David Lynch film, the wilderness refuses to remain a passive backdrop, twisting itself into a space that registers our presence. It strips away our detachment. It forces us to realize that the shadows were never really a shield for our anonymity, but a space that was reflecting our presence and deepest anxieties the entire time. In the daylight, trekking through these rugged trails, we inhabit a world that feels safe, familiar, and bound by human logic. The daytime terrain is stark and quiet, but it acts as a predictable backdrop. It mimics the deceptively cozy, orderly facade of the town of Twin Peaks, where everything is safe and familiar, with a side of cherry pie and damn good coffee. On the trail, we know exactly who we are, and the boundaries of our world feel secure. But when the night falls and the wild presses in, that orderly facade fades away. We are suddenly confronted with what Hegel calls the night of the world, the empty void within consciousness where the illusion of our fixed civilized identity is destroyed. As the familiar terrain dissolves into the shadows, the landscape ceases to be a safe background. It becomes an empty nothingness that contains everything. Much like the dark woods encircling Twin Peaks, it stops being a place out there and instead becomes a physical manifestation of the chaotic night inside us. The trauma of encountering this void is the realization that the terrifying dark is not an external enemy. It is the raw, unmapped source of our own freedom. This is the foundation of speculative identity, the radical collapse of the boundaries of the self, and the moment of pure self-recognition in absolute otherness. It is the realization that the objective world out there is a mirror of our own deep subjectivity. McGowan writes, philosophical thinking in Hegel's mind involves pure self-recognition in absolute otherness. A recognition that one's identity exists outside oneself in the object that appears most other to oneself. This is the recognition of what Hegel calls speculative identity. In the act of speculative identity, the subject grasps its connection with what it cannot encompass. Lynch forces this psychological breakdown on us by exposing the underlying identity of absolute contradiction. In Twin Peaks, we gladly align ourselves with the warmth and safety of the community, while detesting the primal, invasive terror of Bob. But Lynch structurally forces us to realize that the monster isn't a separate entity invading the town from the outside. Instead, it inhabits the loving, grieving father at its very center. He forces us to see that the familiar mask and the hidden monster are the exact same thing. Suddenly, our own desire for comfort is tied directly to the horror, leaving us nowhere safe to hide as observers. That is what this landscape does through the uncanny event. It's not an external threat invading the camp. It's a speculative identity. It's the externalized shape of unconscious desire given physical form by the wild. Looking into the absolute otherness of the dark, we are forced to recognize the very thing we thought we could not encompass. The boundary collapses. There is no separation between the camper and the wild. It is the terrifying realization that I am that. This breakdown is exactly where the illusion of our orderly journey cracks wide open to reveal what Jacques Lacan calls the real. To survive out here, we rely entirely on the symbolic order, the rigid network of language, maps, and common sense that tells us what is logical, coherent, and safe. The symbolic order tells us that the forest operates strictly under natural laws, that the internal mind is wholly separate from the external world, and that the things we repress cannot manifest in the dirt. It keeps us safe by labeling the anomalous as impossible. But Lacan offers a far deeper definition of that boundary. The real is the impossible, not on account of a simple stumbling block against which we bang our heads, but because of the logical stumbling block of what announces itself as impossible in the symbolic. It is from there that the real arises. This is precisely how David Lynch's cinema operates. His films consistently build towards an impossible act, a climactic rupture, where the internal repressed fantasy completely breaks its banks and manifests as an external physical reality. Lynch doesn't just show us strange things. He forces the logically impossible to happen on screen. By making the impossible take form, his work fundamentally challenges the dominant symbolic order, forcing the audience to see radical, unsettling possibilities right where we've been conditioned to see absolute impossibility. When an uncanny event occurs out here in the wild, it functions exactly like a Lynchian climax. The internal nightmare breaks through the framework of the night and manifests as an external fact. It is an impossible act that shatters our ruling symbolic structure. And so, with our camp packed away, it's time to turn back, to trace our steps across the threshold and back to civilization. But I'm walking back without the illusion of a clean slate. We don't come into the wilderness to escape our reality. We come here to watch the impossible take physical form and to realize that we can never truly remain at a safe distance from our own unconscious.